this is Praveen Dabas, and you're with us on the MMA India Show. And with us is Akhilesh Ganavarapu. And today we are going to review UFC Fight Night Portland. Hi, Akhilesh. Thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure, anytime.
And thank you for catching up on the fights for us to review. We know you've been busy and flying in and out, from your holiday from Leh. But of course, a good fight demands to be reviewed. And thanks for joining us.
Sure,
on
my
this
pleasure.
review. So, talking about the main card, Luis Smolka versus Brandon Moreno. I think I didn't know personally much about Brandon Moreno at all. I think this was his debut, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was his debut. He's just 22 years old, and against a guy like Luis Smolka, who's number 9, and not much. I mean, not much to talk about in the fight in terms of it was totally one-sided. He had ground control for some time. Smolka tried to get out. The minute he tried to get out, Moreno got in a guillotine choke, and Smolka tried to get out of it by turning, but he didn't let go of him, and that was the end of the fight.
Right. So Moreno, talking about him, he was on the TUF 24 season, where you had all the flyweight champions from different promotions flying down to compete in the season.
Yeah.
And we did not get to see much of him, as you said, because he was eliminated in the first round of 16 itself. So this was a fight which was originally scheduled between Smolka and Sergio Pettis.
Yeah.
And Pettis, had to pull out of the fight, and was later.
So I think it was just at the he came into the fight on a 3 or 4 day notice, right?
Around a week, yeah.
A week, yeah. Okay.
Yes. So what was interesting to see about Moreno was, not many people knew much about him. He was, I think, a national champion in BJJ in Mexico. So going into the fight, Smolka had every reason to be optimistic about winning the fight, because I thought he was maybe like 2 fights away from getting a title shot.
Yeah.
Smolka had already faced some really, really tough opponents, like I think Paddy Houlihan, before coming into this fight.
Yeah.
So, so this was a fight which Smolka had, a lot to lose, I guess. But the manner in which, Moreno, it was unpaced. You could see Smolka just coming right out aggressively at the beginning of the round.
Yeah.
And the way in which Moreno, stayed back, got his back to the cage, and then, was able to take Smolka down.
Yeah.
So he was going for the guillotine, but Smolka, being a good grappler himself, tried to get away by turning on his back.
Yeah.
And then what Moreno did, which very few grapplers or very few fighters do, is get his elbow up and cinch the guillotine in, which was very, very technical.
Yeah.
And even you could hear someone like Daniel Cormier actually commenting on how technical Moreno looked.
Yeah.
So for a guy who was just 22, that was a very impressive performance going up against a ranked opponent.
Yeah. Do you think Smolka paid the price for underestimating Moreno?
I don't think so, because as I said, Smolka, had to be optimistic about chances. And even against a guy like Sergio Pettis, I thought, Smolka had the upper hand. But, he was being matched against a relatively unknown fighter. Maybe he was a champion in his promotion, but, when you're in the UFC, you're going against the tougher, experienced opponents. And again, Smolka, he had victories against Neil Seery, as I said, Paddy Houlihan. So I think he was, right in the way he approached the fight, but again, the technicality in which Moreno got him in the guillotine, and the way in which he turned him, got his elbow high, made sure that the guillotine was cinched in. Very impressive, very technical.
Yeah. Now, what do you think is next for Smolka?
I don't know. It's a very, very tough question.
But this has, of course, like you said, he was 2 fights away from possibly from a title fight. But this, of course, has put the brakes on that.
Right.
So I guess that's up in the air. But amazing that Brandon Moreno got a chance to come into the UFC.
Right.
Despite losing in the TUF, like you said, yeah.
Yeah. So this was all a lead up from the Ultimate Fighter edition, which is still going on. So. The flyweight division itself is very interesting, because you have one fighter who's just levels above the rest in Demetrius Johnson. I think you could probably go with Ali Bagutinov. I don't know. I mean, it's a tough predicament for Smolka to be in. Going into the fight, he had everything to lose. He was fighting an unranked opponent while Moreno had just came into the UFC. It was his debut fight. He was going up against a ranked opponent. So the manner in which Moreno defeated Smolka, that was no one saw it coming. To be honest.
Yeah, no one saw it coming. Well, getting on to the next fight, Joshua Berkman versus Zach Otto.
Right.
It was, one of those fights where something, of course, kept going on, though not a lot. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it was and of course the decision went to Otto in the end.
Right.
It's sometimes tough to call these fights.
Yes. So again, I thought Otto was very technically sound. The way in which he, controlled the fight by
of course
going
using a lot of leg kicks as well.
Right. Yeah. So he ensured that Bergman wasn't set. And Bergman, is a veteran in the UFC. He has fought some phenomenal fighters. Very recently, if you see his track record, he has fought against KJ Noons. He has fought one of the best fights, I think, in the last year against Cote. So Bergman, and he was very resilient. The last time I think he was stopped was again Patrick Cote. So I thought Otto did very well in the manner in which he controlled the fight. He made sure that Bergman kept switching stances. He did not let him settle the way in which he tried to go about with the high kicks. It was again very technical, but at the end of the day, as you said, no one fighter was really clearly better in the exchange.
Yeah.
But again, I thought Otto again this was his debut fight. So
Otto was another the second debut of the night, rather on the main card.
Right.
Yeah.
On the main card, right. So the manner in which he went up against Bergman, who is again a veteran in the UFC, it was very impressive. At the end of the day, Otto might, and he predicted a third round victory.
Yeah.
So.
And he did get a takedown and something a choke just towards the end. Just almost as the bell was ringing,
Right. So the first two rounds, it was just stand up, while everyone thought Otto, being the better grappler, would go to the ground. But that didn't happen. But in the third round, Bergman was the one who initiated a takedown, got Otto down to the ground, but Otto managed to get up. And towards the dying seconds, he took Bergman to the ground, almost cinched in the rear naked choke. So that was again a very technically sound performance. He clearly won the fight, but it was not in a manner in which it was very decisive.
Or convincing, which is why the split decision.
Right.
Now again in the third round there was some booing. And we've spoken about this before, but like we said, not every fight can be slam bang. Thank you, man. There's going to be these fights which, like we said, are technical. Both the fighters are going to be cautious because they're very high level fighters.
Right.
So not everything can be slam bam.
And the other thing, as I said, Bergman has very good chin.
Yeah.
He was stopped by Cote. I think he had a submission loss before that, but the manner in which Bergman has been fighting, and this loss again probably puts him in a weird predicament because I think he has lost 4 out of his previous 5 fights, including this one. So he has fought some really good opponents, but this time around, I think Otto came in with a really good game plan. And the other thing is, Otto I think came in on 2-week notice.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, he was in UFC Hidalgo cornering his teammate, and that was when Joe Silva gave him a call and said, can you fight on this card in Portland? And he said yes.
Yeah.
He did not even know who his opponent was. So the way in which he came in, he was very technically sound, kept chipping away with the lead leg kicks, making sure that Bergman
both fighters also kept switching stances.
Right. So that's what Otto made sure that Bergman wasn't comfortable. He made sure that the fight went according to his terms. He dictated what was happening. Whenever he needed Bergman to switch stances, he would go in with the head kicks, making sure that Bergman turned and had to go the other way around. Then he kept chipping away at his lead leg. making sure he couldn't put a lot of weight on his front leg.
Yeah.
So that was a very technically sound fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, getting to the next one, Will Brooks, Alex Oliveira, which was had all the makings of a great fight, of course. Will Brooks, 18-1. Oliveira, always exciting. He won his last fight. The one before that, he lost to Donald Cerrone. Right.
So he came in with just a couple of days, maybe a week notice. For the Cerrone fight. And Cerrone just moved up to 170.
Yeah.
To take, which again, showed his enthusiasm about fighting inside the octagon. And this time around, Oliveira was one of the 3 Brazilians to have missed weight, which was again very weird.
Yeah.
So it also made sense because there was this one fighter called Luis Santos who fought on 1FC card. He was flown to Asia with just a couple of days. So what these fighters do is they need to acclimatize, especially if you're from another country like Brazil and you're coming down to either Asia or the United States. The same way if you're a Canadian or the United States fighter fighting in Mexico, which is completely different, and it's a different environment. So you need to get accustomed to it, acclimatize to it. So even Oliveira's manager said, you know what, we underestimated the amount of time we needed for Oliveira to cut down the weight. They were in Brazil during the last card to support his teammates. Then he had to fly down to United States, and somehow they mixed up the process. And in the end, he wasn't able to get down to his scheduled weight. But that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah. But what was surprising about, like you mentioned, three Brazilians missed weight. One of them, John Lineker, was on weight 2 days before the fight.
Right.
And then the weight was mismanaged after that then.
Right. So Lineker's case is very interesting because this is not his first time in missing weight. He has missed weight a couple of times at 125. Then he has missed weight a couple of times at 135.
Yeah.
He is the only fighter to have missed weight 5 times. So, his case is interesting to say the least. But again, coming down to Oliveira, so during the fight, you could see the frame difference. Oliveira was much, much bigger than Brooks, and I'm a big fan of Brooks.
Yeah.
I followed his career. He was one of the most dominant champions at Bellator. And the way he came to UFC, he said, you know what, there are no more opponents for me to finish. He finished Michael Chandler in Bellator, who is he was the current champion, He's one of the best fighters on the planet. So he said, what Bellator has done, it's time for me to go to the UFC and really challenge myself. And he had a very good victory against Pearson in his debut fight. So I thought going into the fight, Brooks would have it covered because he's, again, exceptional wrestler, one of the most well-rounded fighters on the UFC roster. And again, both these guys, one with Muay Thai, kickboxing background, the other with a mix of everything, kickboxing, Muay Thai, and wrestling. And Will Brooks clearly dominated the first 2 rounds. The ease in which he took Oliveira down to the ground, and the ease in which he managed to stuff whatever Oliveira was throwing at him with those takedown defenses.
Yeah.
It was very clinical.
At the end of the first round, Alex did get a choke in.
Right. So,
but we was very close to the end of the round.
Barely did, yeah.
Barely
but
did, yeah.
I think the decisive part of the fight was in the clinches, where Oliveira, with the bigger frame, with the weight advantage, was able to push Brooks back to the cage, and then connected with those nasty knees.
Yeah.
And Brooks actually broke his rib in the first round.
That was in the first round itself, right?
Yes, within those clinches. So that was where Oliveira used his frame advantage, just to pressure Brooks back and then chipped away with those nasty knees to the ribs. But again, Brooks showed tremendous technical abilities where he wasn't fazed by the fact that Oliveira was, pushing him to the fence. He used some exceptional cage controlling techniques to make sure that he was steps above Oliveira in terms of execution, and the way in which he used the cage to stuff Oliveira's takedown attempts and make sure. So this was once again an exceptional example of how a fighter could kind of move his hips, move his right leg to the outside, and turn the other opponent, put him against the cage, and take him down. So that's exactly what Brooks did. So the first and second, I thought Brooks was phenomenal.
Yeah. What I also find surprising is even though he's on a nine fight win streak, 18-1, but he was relatively unknown coming into this fight.
Right. I mean, as I said, he's a champion in Bellator, which is like the second biggest MMA organization. So everyone knew Brooks was phenomenal.
Yeah.
The only thing
what I mean is everybody from the MMA world who knew, like, the people in the know knew about him. But generally there wasn't people. He wasn't like a big name as such. He was relatively unknown by the masses, if you want to call it, or the UFC following public.
Right. I mean, he was. So that is why he said, you know what, let me go down to UFC and make a name for myself.
Yeah.
So when you are, the best standout fighter, and, by the way, so he came down to the UFC and immediately threw a challenge to Eddie Alvarez, who was once again a champion in Bellator.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting, situation where another fight, and after just one fight, Brooks was ranked.
Yeah.
So everyone kind of expected Brooks to win the fight, and he was doing very well even in the second round with a broken rib.
Yeah.
But in the third round, you could see once Oliveira took Brooks down, you could see Brooks wincing in pain.
Yeah.
So he knew that his ribs had given out.
Yeah. And Alex never, gave up. He got those elbows in again, and referee had to stop the fight.
Right.
And what happened? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is the debate which happens, and Oliveira did not miss weight by like 1 pound.
Yeah.
It was a substantial weight difference, and you're not allowed to do that. As a fighter, you are contractually obligated to make weight.
Yeah.
That is a part of being a fighter, being a professional fighter. So I thought, this might not be the best thing to happen for Brooks, because if you again see the frame difference, Oliveira was considerably much bigger.
Yeah. Now, what do you think? Because it is, of course, an unfair advantage, and I think he was only giving up 20 or 30% of his purse.
20%, yes.
20%, yeah. And if you are giving up 20% of your purse, but you are, a much bigger fighter, anyway, you're coming in with the, advantage. Shouldn't the fight be called off if you miss weight by that margin?
No. So what the Athletic Commission does is it has a specified range in which you can make weight. For example, this is where the opponent has to take a call. I remember one fight which I covered in Macau in China, where the opponent missed weight, and the fighter had the opportunity to either take the fight and take 20% of the fight purse, or say, you know what, I'm not going to fight. And the fighter said, I'm not going to fight, which again is very intelligent.
Yeah.
Because see, the UFC has to pay the fighter anyways, because the fighter, what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
He went to his training camp, he was prepared, he made weight. His opponent did.
Yeah.
So that is not his fault.
Yeah.
So this is where the opponent has to say, you know what, either I'm going to take the fight and take 20% of the fight purse, or we're going to call the fight off. And this is where Brooks said, you know what, we're going to fight.
Yeah.
So, you could make a case for Oliveira missing weight, because you can understand that he was in Brazil just 1 week, away from the fight night. But with that big of a difference when it comes down to strength and frame, I thought Brooks was clearly at a distinct disadvantage.
Now, there was some unpleasantness, of course, after the fight, and we've, I think, spoken about sportsmanship behavior and all of that before also. He made some, Oliveira after winning, made some rude gestures, if we can, underplay it by calling it rude, but they're actually, it was pretty humiliating, of course, those gestures. And it's the same one that John Jones has made to Daniel Cormier also before. So, and Brooks, of course, didn't like it, even though he was down and out, and he came, towards Alex to challenge him, and the referee had to step in to stop both of them. Now, again, of course, this leaves a bad taste, in the mouth when you've already won. You don't really have to dig it in like that.
You don't have to. That was not anything that any fighter should have done. Again, Oliveira. See, if he didn't miss weight, then you may give him a benefit of the doubt. But he didn't do that. He didn't make weight. He missed weight, and after doing that, you're forfeiting 20% of your fight purse, and then the opponent is clearly in pain. He broke his rib. He could not get up. But then, you start doing the crotch chops, you start flipping him off or whatever, which is not something any fighter should do. especially a fighter who missed weight by that
Yeah, and he
large.
says he was disrespected by Brooks after he missed weight, which I guess Brooks had every right to do, you know,
Right.
in a way, because his opponent just missed weight and not by a small margin. Anyway, so he did say sorry, I guess, in the end, but easier said than done. I guess these are things that can be avoided, but they happen in the heat of the moment as well.
Yes, they can, but again, every fighter can then make a case for themselves, saying, "Hey, you know what? It was in the heat of the moment," and can flip the opponent off.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
that
So they have to be. I guess you have to have the sportsmanship spirit. Maybe the UFC can start fining fighters.
they usually do that, but then there is something that the state athletic commission can do, because it is under the state athletic commission's watch that all these fights happen. But again, the thing is, if you do that to one fighter, you set a precedent. You have to do it to every other
Everybody,
fighter. Now imagine what would happen, to a fighter who kicked referee, not too long ago, because of the decision that he took, Roy Nelson. So then, if you're finding someone like Oliveira, imagine what you have to do to Roy Nelson.
Well, Dana White did say he has to be buried. You cannot under any circumstances touch the referee. For anything, it doesn't matter.
Right. The last time a fighter actually did that in the UFC, he got fired after the fight.
Yeah.
He got his termination pay.
Yeah. We seem to have lost Akhilesh for a bit. We're going to take a small break and get him back in the meanwhile. Hi, this is Praveen Davas, and you're back with the MMA India Show, and Akhilesh is back with us after some connection issues. But here he's back, and we were, of course, talking about Roy Nelson, also how he put his hands on the referee, and he is, I think, going to be in for a ban, maybe a big fine. I think it should be much more than a fine. It should be a ban, because like we were saying, under no circumstances can you touch the referee, and he kicked him in his ass. He literally fucking kicked him in his ass.
Right.
So
yeah, as I said, the previous fighter who put his hands on the referee in the UFC got his walking papers.
Yeah.
So as I said, as a fighter, probably you could make that you have done something in the heat of the moment, but after missing weight and then doing this doesn't set a good precedence.
Yep. Now he's apparently going to be moving to welterweight now, Alex Oliveira.
Yes. So he said he might, but again, a lot of fighters switch back and forth between two weight classes.
Of course they do.
Yeah. So with the thing that I could see with Oliveira is, at 170 is probably one of the average framed fighters, but at 155 is very big, considerably bigger than most of his opponents, like you have seen with Brooks, for example, in this fight itself. So if I were Oliveira, if I had an advantage fighting at 155 rather than fighting at 170, I would still fight at 155. But it depends on the amount of weight that you're cutting. If it's healthy for you, you can talk to someone like Uriah Faber, for example, who fights at 135, but it's considerably much bigger. He used to fight at 145 as well. So it all depends upon what Oliveira might think and what his experience was with this weight cut. Probably it was a one-off thing. Let's hope that it's a one-off thing.
Yeah.
But if you're having difficulties in cutting weight, I think it's always safer as a fighter and as a professional to fight at 170, which is much safer for him.
And Donald Cerrone also has moved up, and he says he feels much better and a lot more energy, and he fights. He just feels much better fighting.
Right. So if you don't have to cut so much weight before a fight, then rehydrate and get back the amount of water that your body has lost. It's always easier, and the amount of weight you cut, it takes a considerable toll on you as a person and you as a fighter, because I've seen a lot of fighters who cut a lot of weight to come down to a certain weight class, and once they rehydrate and everything, it's still not the same. They're still not the same kind of fighter that they were before.
Which is why the earlier weigh-ins are much better now for the fighters. Even if it's just some hours, but it still helps them much more.
Right. So
rehydrating. Yeah.
what certain organizations have done is they have completely removed weight cutting. They say a fighter has to fight at his walking weight.
Yeah.
We can make a case for one championship which has done that.
Yeah.
You have a couple of fighters who actually died while cutting weight. So that is never a safe experience. It was carried from the amateur wrestling scene that has been happening in the United States. But if you could always fight at your walking weight, I think that would be much better for a fighter. But the fact that you have substantial advantage over your opponents while cutting down weight and moving to a lower weight class, I think that is an attractive proposition because you're having an advantage walking into the cage itself.
I think the biggest example of that is Conor McGregor.
Right.
Yeah. He towers over everybody else in that division.
Exactly. At 145, he's probably one of the biggest 145ers.
The biggest, division. Yeah.
So, that is where some fighters would say, what, if I'm getting an advantage walking into the cage itself, why do I have to, make weight at a higher weight class? Because then I would be, if you look at 170, okay, Conor used to fight at 155. If you even look at 155 or even 170, Conor is nowhere as big as the other fighters.
Right. And so I think part of the skill in those fights comes in cutting the weight.
Right. So again, you have a lot of dietitians. You have the Dolce diet. You have Lockhart, who works with fighters like Uriah Faber to cut down weight. You have people, you've seen what happened with Chris Cyborg. Every time she makes 140, she will never be the same again.
Yeah.
You have seen how dominant she was a few years ago. A fight against Gina Carano, for example.
It damages the system because it's not healthy.
Yes, so she was monstrous. She had monstrous power. Right now she does, yes. But again, if you see that Cyborg and compare her to the one that fought at 140 recently, not the same fighter.
Yeah.
It has taken a toll on her body, which happens to every fighter.
Well, coming to the main event.
Yeah.
John Hands of Stone Lineker versus John the Magician Dodson.
Yes.
Amazing fight. Easily the best fight of the night. I mean,
yes.
I would say so. John Dodson's plan was very evident. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. And in fact, in the second round, Lineker started mocking him as well. I found that pretty funny. He started mocking him and everything. But I thought John Dodson's movement was amazing. He controlled the flow of the fight.
Right.
And the way it was going. And he was frustrating Lineker most of the time. And after one of the rounds, I forgot if it was the third round or what, his coach was actually telling him that, John Lineker is a wind-up toy. You touch him and he's going to throw a punch. So you need to just dodge it all the time and, hit back.
Right.
So which was actually which is what was happening. Lineker was doing his slow stalk around the court most of the time of John Dodson. Of course, now, there were these amazing engagements and combinations thrown by both of them. But Dodson was, whenever he wanted, he was getting out of the way.
Right.
Some people might call that running away. I think we've had this, discussion before, and we're going to get to that at the end of the fight again. We're going to talk about that again. But I think John Dodson's cardio and his movement was just phenomenal.
Right. So this is a patented approach that is carried out by fighters from Jackson Wink. You see a lot of fighters like, for example, John Jones, and ever since Holly Holm has moved to Greg Jackson and Jackson Wink. She has taken the same approach, which is kind of maintaining your distance, keeping the range, and countering. Fighting from the outside, making sure that the opponent doesn't.
It's almost like guerrilla warfare.
Yes, and the other thing. Right, and the other thing with John Dodson is, even if you look at his fights at 125, he was, one of the best fighters in the division. The only fighter that he couldn't get through was the champion.
Yeah, of course.
Demetrius Johnson. Yeah. So, the other great thing about Dodson is, we had this conversation like a couple of months ago when Dodson came to Manila, where I asked him, he has a background in wrestling, but the way he has transitioned to kickboxing as a kickboxer and evolved as a boxer, he said, it was a very interesting transition because, people who have a background in, say, kickboxing, it is probably a little easier for them to transition to wrestling because it's very basic. For wrestling, you just have to keep the basics right. But when you're transitioning from, say, a wrestling background to kickboxing or as a boxer, that is when you have to really incorporate those techniques to the maximum extent. which is what Dodson has done. And if you look at his fights, he's one of those movement fighters who just slips out, connects with his jabs combinations, and then slips out from the range, and then keeps his distance, and until he finds another opening where he lands his jabs and combinations.
Yeah.
So it was a very technical approach. I thought John Dodson would really use his wrestling background and take Lineker down, but I could understand why he didn't do that. If you close that distance, he tried to do that. He tried to.
I think he tried to do that once or twice.
Right, he tried to change levels, but Lineker immediately had his knee up. So Dodson knew immediately that that probably might not be the best thing to do. The other thing that Dodson might have thought was, he was landing significant strikes. He was well above Lineker in terms of the amount of significant strikes he was throwing. So I thought John Dodson was even encouraged by the fact that he was kind of getting his range in control. He was throwing good combinations. And the fact that he caught Lineker with those head kicks, and he managed to sneak in those combinations.
Which was amazing. Those head kicks were like, they landed flush on his temple, and he was still standing like nothing happened.
Right, and Lineker is has one of the best chins in the division, hands down, and he's ranked at number 3 for a reason.
Yeah.
So again, Lineker missed weight. We were talking about this before.
Yep.
So he missed weight. This was the 5th time he missed weight. Probably one of the most number of times that a fighter has missed weight in the UFC. Which again doesn't speak well, because he did that again at 125. He moved up to 135 where he missed weight again on a couple of occasions. But Lineker is someone who wants to stand and trade, much like Robbie Lawler, for example.
Yeah.
And he has really good chin. The fact that he has good chin kind of helps him go with the style that he has.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting fight where Lineker just wanted to stand at one position and then trade combinations.
Yeah.
While Dodson was more than happy to get out of those predicaments So Lineker, I think, if you have a slower fighter, it's easy for you to cut cage and make sure that, you trap someone against the fence.
Yeah.
But you cannot do that against someone like John Dodson, who relies on his movement.
Yeah.
So, it was very interesting. It was an interesting ploy on Dodson's part.
Yeah.
But he might not have seen the finish the way it came about.
Yeah. He was trying to bait him and mock him into giving up his game plan.
Right.
And get him into, an actual slam bam. But he wasn't able to do that. Of course, John Dodson's not stupid. He was going to stick to his game plan no matter how much Lineker was going to mock him. And he stuck to his game plan. Of course, now getting to the end and the decision now, because we have spoken about this before, whether you can call it running or whether you can call it readjusting, whatever you want to call it. Now, the one thing I find strange and I always have a problem with is, I feel, the judges need to be clear about this. If you see it in the corner, now coming to this fight before I speak about something else, it's apparent that the judges, I think, took that into consideration. That Lineker was pressing forward most of the time.
Right. So the other thing that judges that we can see and the judges can't see is the number of significant strikes that are thrown.
Yeah.
For example, if you have a volume puncher, a high volume puncher, like for example, we talk about Jimmy Rivera and Uriah Faber before the fight. You saw that Jimmy Rivera was a high volume puncher. So you have fighters who throw a lot of combinations, and it's not that they connect or anything, but the only thing is they press forward. They are they're high aggressive strikers who move forward and make sure that, they try to gain more momentum, gain control over the round. The thing that we can see though is the number of actual significant strikes that have landed.
Yeah.
And if you look at that, Dodson landed more significant strikes than Lineker.
Yeah.
While if you look at the volume of strikes that were thrown, Lineker was way, above what Dodson had thrown at him. So it comes down to how you judge the fight, because if you look at the technique and if you look at the control, the amount of time a fighter was in control of the fight, it was Dodson.
Yeah.
But if you look at the aggressive approach, it was Lineker, hands down. So when you even see, how the scoring is done, for example, before the main fights, UFC has this, stat that is shown where the round is, how the round is judged. And they say, it is taken into consideration how aggressive the striker is, how many strikes he has landed, how many takedowns he has landed, how much time was in control, and his cage controlling ability. So it is difficult for a judge to take all of those things into consideration while watching it, in real time. But we, as fans, probably sitting down, having the ability to watch those
Of course,
replays.
we have a much easier way of judging.
Yes.
Now, but
Yes.
coming to what I was saying was the Conor McGregor Nate Diaz part 2, right?
Right.
Conor McGregor was running there, if you want to call it running, or whatever you want to call it. Again, he was doing the same thing, but he
Right.
apparently wasn't penalized for it. They did not consider Nate Diaz's, coming forward and I think Nate Diaz had more significant strikes than Conor, but his stats were better. Again, something that the judges couldn't see. Now, isn't this the reverse thing? Oh, in that fight, you had a guy who was running but won, and here you had somebody who was running but lost, even though he had control most of the time.
Right. See, even if you look at the Conor Nate fight, I think Conor threw more significant strikes because Nate at one point he was just standing there and saying, "Come on, let's trade."
Yeah.
So and the other thing was Conor was in control because of the leg kicks that he threw at Nate, and he also took Nate down. So all those things came into consideration. But if you talk about fighters, probably getting away from their opponents rather than exchanging.
Yeah.
So the fighters have an interesting theory. They say, you know what, if the fight is not going according to your game plan, what can you do? You cannot just stand there and take punches. That would be, stupid.
Yeah.
So what you do is you maintain distance, you reset.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what Dodson was doing was the same thing because that was his game plan. He knew Lineker would be, the aggressive one. He knew Lineker would be trying to close the distance. He knew also for a fact that if Lineker, throwing those hooks the way he was, if he could dodge those, he could easily sneak in with a couple of combinations.
Yeah.
And that was exactly what Dodson was doing.
Yeah.
Lineker was throwing a lot of punches and combinations. What Dodson was doing was he was just getting down. He was changing levels. He made sure that he escaped those predicaments and stuck in a couple of combinations.
Counter-attacking most of the time.
Yeah. So as a counter puncher, Dodson had the best game plan that he could implement. But at the end, again, it depends. Completely depends on how a judge sees the fight. Sorry. And I've seen, for a fact, if I see the name of Sal Diamaro, who is one of the judges, if I see that name on the names of the referee list, I think this fight will not go the way it is supposed to, because he has messed things up quite a lot.
Yeah.
And he was once again one of the judges for this fight. So the moment I saw his name as one of the names of the judges, I thought this could be, another controversial ending.
Now there's something I didn't completely understand. I have an idea of it. Maybe, I think your knowledge of, the rules is much better than mine. In round 5, Dodson took Lineker down and got his back. Lineker got up. Dodson was still on his back. They went to the cage. And then the referee got them to stop and engage again. Was that due to inactivity, that they were both really doing nothing? He was just on his back. Lineker was standing with him against the cage.
Right. So the referee did not stop the fight, by the way. So it was a position where Lineker had Dodson against the cage, and Dodson wasn't doing anything. So Lineker looked at the referee and he said he's not engaging.
Yeah.
So the rule is, if for a couple of seconds, if the fighters aren't engaging, then the referee has to step in. Then he has to once again put it in a neutral perspective. This the same thing happens when, for example, a fight is stopped midway when someone has the advantage over the other. For example, when they're on the ground, and if someone has the top position, but for some reason the fight had to be stopped. Right? Someone might have got a poke in an eye poke. Someone might have have inadvertently low blowed someone else. Then the fight is stopped. The fighters are checked, and the fighters are asked to resume in the same position, which is something that we see when it comes down to jiu-jitsu, when it comes down to judo. And the same is followed in MMA.
Yeah.
This time around, it was not once; it was twice. The fighters actually stopped engaging, looked at the referee, and the referee didn't do anything. So he's not supposed to do anything.
Yeah.
When you hurt your opponent, you're supposed to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Right. When Dodson was on Lineker's back, there was no reason for the fight to be stopped. But Lineker, for some reason, looked at the referee and said he's not doing anything. He's not engaging. So do something, step in. But the referee didn't, which is the right thing to do.
He did. He made Dodson get off his back, and he made them re-engage.
No.
Then, no.
No, that was Dodson himself. So Lineker shrugged him off. Then they started engaging
Okay,
again.
so my bad. I didn't completely understand. That bit, what was going on, because they both looked confused. I heard Lineker saying something to the referee, Dodson shrugging his shoulders, and then getting off and starting the fight again.
Right. So Lineker looked at the referee and said, "You know what? He's not engaging."
Yeah.
But again, Dodson was in a position where he could have easily taken advantage of the situation and probably cinched in a rear naked choke, but he didn't.
I thought actually he was going to do that. I actually thought he was going to do that. But now this is again, do you think Dodson also suffers sometimes because of this whole nice guy persona? He's having fun and everything, high-fiving and everything. Of course, he's a brilliant fighter.
Right.
But at that point of time, Lineker was talking to the referee. He could have taken advantage of it. The referee had not said anything to Dodson.
Right. But again, you could have probably seen during the fight itself that both the fighters respected each other a lot.
Yeah.
So it was not. So even when they were exchanging, if they landed some really good combinations, you could see them hugging each other, high-fiving each other.
Yeah.
So that comes down to the amount of respect that both the fighters have for each other. So I thought maybe Dodson was not willing to kind of be the bad guy and take advantage of a situation where Lineker was not probably concentrating on the fight itself.
Yeah.
But again, fair game. Lineker wanted to just stand and trade. Dodson again implemented his game plan. Lineker managed to shrug Dodson off. Then they once again started to exchange.
Well, yes, and it was a great fight nonetheless. I think it was a really amazing, entertaining fight. And with that, we finished the post-match review of UFC Portland. But we are going to be back in a second with a really, really special guest. So hold on, the MMA India Show. Be right back. Hi, this is Parveen Dabas, and you're back with the MMA India Show. Our very special guest had some communication problems over Skype, but she will be back with us very soon on another episode. And let me share her name. Her name is Manjeet Kolikar. She is the first Indian woman to fight, Indian fighter to fight in a major American or world championship. Her name is Manjeet Kolikar, and she's going to be with us very soon. Till next time, this is Parveen Davas signing off. Thank you for joining us at the MMA India Show.